Chapter 2 of Tractate Shabbos largely discusses the laws of the Shabbos candles, which are lit prior to Shabbos' start with a blessing. It also discusses the laws of Chanukah towards the beginning. The first Mishnah discusses which types of candles and wicks are used for this obligation, the main common denominator being to create a candle that ensures a steady flame. This excludes wicks made of cedar bast, uncarded flax, floss silk, willow bast, desert fiber, and sea moss, all of which don't hold a flame very well. The fuels which should not be used are pitch, wax, a few types of oil, which will be defined more in the Gemara, fat from a sheep's tail, and tallow. Some say we may use boiled tallow. The Gemara goes on to relist each of these, just with an explanation as to what they are. They also add to the list of wicks any wool or hair, as they curl and burn. The undefined oils that can't be used were either oil extract from a certain bird, cottonseed oil, or some other plant, and later on it says impure teruma oil of some sort. The wicks are all forbidden because the flame flickers by them, and the fuels are not allowed because they don't absorb well into the wick. In addition, you can't use these even if you mix in some allowed oil. There's some debate further if this is actually permissible based on the actions of several sages, but that's the resulting opinion. Similarly, you can't use any of those oils or wicks in the temple either. They would actually tear up old priestly garments to make wicks, but those were made out of linen, so it was allowed. Okay, now we're going to spend the next few pages talking about the laws of Chanukah. This is basically the entire Gemara's dedicated Chanukah discussion, so pretty brief compared to a lot of the other subjects, but here we go. All of those above wicks and oils that you can't use for Shabbos candles, according to 1, can't be used for Chanukah candles either, as if Chanukah candles go out because it's a poor flame, you're obligated to relight them, which can cause problems, and it also holds that you can use the light of Chanukah candles for personal use. The other opinion states that you may actually use those candles during the week of Chanukah, the ones with poor flames and wicks and whatever, but when Shabbos falls out on Chanukah, then you may not use them. This is because he holds that you don't need to relight the candles if they go out. The third opinion is that you can actually use these candles on the entire Chanukah, even Shabbos, as he holds that you don't need to relight them, and that you're not allowed to benefit from the candles for your own use. So, it's not really a huge deal if the candles don't do too well. There's some disagreement with the point that the second two opinions have, that you don't need to relight your Chanukah candles, but the point is disproven. There are 3 ways to light Chanukah candles. First way is to just light a candle each night for your household. The better method is to light a candle for each method of your household each night, and the best, most proper way, according to Beis Shammai, is to light 8 candles on the first night and decrease 1 candle each night until you have 1 candle on the last night. And the other opinion of Beis Hillel is to do 1 candle on the first night and 1 more each night until you light 8 candles on the last night of Chanukah. There are some reasons brought for both of them. Beis Shammai, who says to do 8 and then decrease, is either because he's counting how many days are left each night, or because we want to correspond to the bull sacrifice brought on the holiday of Sukkot, which decreased daily in a similar manner. Beis Hillel, saying we start with 1 and count our way up to 8, is because either we're counting how many days have passed, or because in matters of holiness we only ever want to count up. Some people did like either one for either of those reasons, but the accepted custom nowadays is obviously to light 1 candle on the first night of Chanukah and count our way up to 8. The place to put the Chanukah menorah should be in a visible manner by the doorway to your house, outside, or by a window facing outdoors. And if it's a dangerous time for the Jewish people, light it inside on your table. If you do that, make sure to have an obvious separate source of light, so that way you're not using the Chanukah candles for your personal benefit. It also mentions the source for the holiday of Chanukah, which is, of course, as the Syrian Greek armies invaded Jerusalem and the temple, defiling it, so the Maccabees fought back and won, but found 1 pure jug of olive oil, so it was lit, and that miraculously burnt for 8 days. Another point, there's a later source which is discussing many forms of fire damages, and one of the cases is if a camel carrying flax was walking in public, passed by a shop where a candle was lit, caught fire, and then burnt down a house, it's the camel owner that's liable. If the candle was outside, however, the shopkeeper is liable. However, if it's a Chanukah candle that's outside, the shopkeeper is not liable. The implication of the case is that the Chanukah candle must be placed lower by the ground, within 10 cubits, because otherwise, if placing them high up was an option, the camel owner in this case could argue that the Chanukah candle was placed too low in a hazardous spot. Well, no, that's not such a great proof, as you could say he's allowed to put his candles wherever he wants, even close to the ground, as if people were required to create like a whole rig to get their candles up to a safe place up high, people would just stop lighting Hanukkah candles. In addition, similar to other laws, a Chanukah candle cannot be placed above 20 amos from the ground. Another very miscellaneous teaching: when Yosef, the biblical figure, was tossed into a pit by his brothers, it says that the pit was empty and there was no water in it. It says no water, being seemingly redundant, to teach that there were snakes and scorpions inside. Okay, back to Hanukkah candles. The candles must be placed within a cubit of your doorway. Some say to the right. We hold to the left, so that way you have mitzvahs surrounding you with your menorah on the left and your mezuzah on the right. Also, similar to the respect shown while covering up the blood of a slaughtered animal, which is another practice, you shouldn't use your menorah light for mundane purposes, like counting money. A similar principle exists by the fruits people would hang up as their sukkahs decorations, that you shouldn't eat them, similar to the laws by the covering of the blood. In fact, there are particularities to be respectful by mitzvahs in many areas, but we do say, according to some opinions, that it's actually permissible to kindle one Chanukah light to another Chanukah light. We may unfasten tzitzis from a garment and attach it to another garment, and that you can drag a bench on Shabbos if your intention is not to make a furrow in the ground. Some say we're strict and don't light from Chanukah candle to Chanukah candle, either because we don't want to disrespect the commandment, in which case the issue is lighting using a match of some sort between candles, or because we don't want to disrespect the object of the commandment, in which case the issue would be lighting from actual candle to candle. We attempt to bring a few disproofs for those 2 points, first from a point about Meiser Sheni tithe coins, and then we say that the temple menorah lamps were permanently attached, but they didn't use a match in between. The wicks were really long and kindled each other. So that makes sense according to the opinion that we don't light other candles via a match, but causes unresolved issues with the opinion that you can't light Hanukkah candles with other candles. This issue, which of the two is the main problem, is largely dependent on if the kindling of the Hanukkah candles or the placing of the candles is the main requirement. So we try to bring some proofs either way. There's a source that says if you just stand there holding your candle the whole time, it doesn't do anything. Implied is that the obligation of Hanukkah candles is in placing them down. Well, no, as that there could be because it looks like he's using the candles for his own personal reasons, hence that's why it's not a valid fulfillment of the obligation. Okay, different proof. If somebody lights their Hanukkah candles inside and then brings them to their proper place outside, it's invalid. Implied is that just placing the candles in their proper place is insufficient and the obligation is to actually kindle them there. Well, no, the same disproof as before. There it's invalid because it looks like he's using those candles for personal reasons. A final proof: there's a law that if you light a candle for Shabbos and it burns all day to Hanukkah start, you should extinguish the candle and then relight it. If the obligation was to place the candles down, then seemingly you'd be required to pick up the candle and put them back down too. And also, simply, the blessing on Hanukkah candles is literally who has commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light. So it's pretty clear that the obligation is with the actual kindling. And based on that, a deaf, mute, an insane individual, or a minor have no obligation in kindling the Hanukkah candles. However, women do, as they were involved with the miracle of Hanukkah. Also, a guest is obligated to light Hanukkah candles. Some did this by paying their host some coins to be included in the commandment, and when they got married, they were covered by their wife's lighting. Of all the oil to be used for the menorah, olive oil is the best, as it produces the best light. Also, side point, olive oil is great for making ink, as is blackthorn gum. There are 3 blessings said on lighting the menorah, all 3 of which are said on the first 2 days of Hanukkah. But if you're only watching somebody light them, you say the last 2. In the days after that continues, we just remove the Shechianu blessing for everybody. A brief question as to the biblical source for these blessings, and it's either you shall not deviate, or ask your father and he will tell you. There are exceptions to these blessings if it's a rabbinic ordinance in a case of doubt, for instance in regards to tithing demai. But the institution of holidays being 2 days long was due to doubt in regards to the calendar establishment, and yet we still say blessings then. So either the second day of holidays are unique, as they should be treated with respect and require a blessing, or we do always require blessings by rabbinic ordinances, even by doubts. It's just that demai tithes have an exception not to, as that's not even a rabbinic ordinance, it's a rabbinic stringency. If you have 2 entrances to your house on opposite sides, some say you need 2 menorahs by both of them, as people in your town might walk by one of your doors, see you don't have a menorah lit in your entranceway, and assume you didn't light at all. The source for such a concern is based on the many reasons we leave peah, which is charity produce from our field for the poor. For Chanukah candles, a lamp with 2 openings can count for 2 people. A dish filled with oil with a bunch of wicks inside is considered like one big fire and doesn't work for everybody, but if you put a vessel over them, then it counts for several people. More important than Chanukah candles or even Kiddush wine for Shabbos, if you could only afford one, you buy Shabbos candles, as they create peace in your home. If it's between Shabbos wine and Chanukah candles are preferable since they publicize the miracle of Chanukah. Some other points: if you light Shabbos and Chanukah candles, you'll merit children who are Torah scholars. If you do mezuzah, you'll merit a beautiful residence. Tzitzis, beautiful garments. Shabbos wine, you'll fill many kegs of wine. There are a few stories of great sages being born to people who are particular about their candles. Generally, by kindling for Shabbos, you could do it earlier, but don't push it off to the last second. Some more points: if you love Torah sages, you'll have children who are Torah sages. If you honor Torah sages, you'll have son-in-laws who are Torah sages. And if you fear Torah sages, you'll become a Torah sage. And if you can't, then your words will be respected like a Torah sage. We also make additions to our after blessing by adding the Al Hanisim prayer in the middle. We similarly add the Ya'aleh V'Yavoi prayer by Rosh Chodesh. There are also arguments if we make these additions by the additional Musaf prayer, although it goes on about that for a bit. Alright, that's about it for Chanukah. Back to Shabbos with a new Mishnah. Continuing the previous topic as to which fuels you shouldn't use, on a Shabbos that fell out on a holiday, you don't like using impure teruma oil that needs to be burned. We also don't burn pitch residue, as it has a poor smell and won't honor Shabbos. The rabbis allow all oil, sesame, nut, radish, fish, colocynth, pitch residue, and naphtha. Rabbi Tarfon says we may only use olive oil. The Gemara lists several biblical verses and reasons that say you can't burn impure teruma oil on a holiday. There is argument if it's permissible on a weekday. It seems to imply, based on some verses, that it is allowed for your fire on a weekday. We don't allow pitch residue, as it smells poorly, and that'll make you leave the room, which is problematic, as some people say you have to light the candles where you eat. Some also say whether washing yourself before Shabbos is obligated or optional. It also lists several biblical verses which contain implication for the requirements of Shabbos, like candles, washing yourself, and others. A quick side point: who is a wealthy man? There are many opinions. Some say someone who takes pleasure in his wealth, somebody with hundreds of vineyards, fields, and workers, someone with a beautiful wife. Indeed is another option, which was said by Rabbi Akiva, and is particularly nice if you know his story. And the last opinion is somebody with good hygiene, with a latrine near his table. It also taught you shouldn't use balsam to light your Shabbos candles, as that smells very good and you might try to use it for yourself. But the main reason is because balsam oil is very volatile and dangerous. In fact, there's this story where this lady hated her daughter-in-law, so told her to anoint herself with balsam oil, which she did, and then told her to light a lamp, which she also did, and her daughter-in-law got incinerated. There's also some biblical reference to balsam, and also the chalazain fish. We also can't kindle using impure tevel, basically ever, based on some verses. There are further arguments as to which oils can and cannot be used as fuels, but that's the idea. It also gets itself into an argument about a small cloth, 3x3 finger breadths, whether or not it can contaminate leprosy impurity, which also goes on for a bit. This gets into a wider, sidetracked conversation about other forbidden cloth mixtures of shatnez, wool, and linen, and similar points. It goes on about the sources, some specific details and measurements, and the sources for those, but then there's a new Mishnah. Now about wicks again. Anything from a tree cannot be used for Shabbos candle wicks, besides for flax. Another point, anything from a tree does not become impure when being used as a roof for a corpse, besides for flax. The Gemara cites verses to let us know that yes, flax is referred to as a tree. It also brings sources for the points on impurity and flax roofs. This gets into a broader conversation about hides used for the tabernacle, specifically a strange animal known as a tachash that's referenced in the Torah, which was kosher apparently, and resembles some other animal in that it has many colors, which is why this animal is also called a saskona, meaning to rejoice in its many colors. This goes further on laws of impurity in regards to animal hides. This about animal hides gets into a brief point about the making of tefillin, which must be made using kosher animal hide. The head tefillin must have the Hebrew letter shin protruding, a passed down tradition from Mount Sinai. They must be sewn shut with kosher sinew. The straps must be kosher and black, also a passed down tradition. Based on all this, the tefillin must be made using kosher animals, but the tabernacle itself did not have to be. A bit more on the multicolored tachash animal. It also says that the one that existed by Moshe was a unique species, that the sages couldn't decide if it was undomesticated or not, and it had a single horn on its head. It presented itself to Moshe when it was needed. You used its hide for the tabernacle, and then it was hidden away. So, do with that information what you will. Based on the fact that it has horns, that probably means it was kosher, as it also says that the bull that Adam offered to God had one horn, which was kosher. There's also a similar animal, now a wild animal of some sort with a single horn. New Mishnah, some points on wicks. A folded garment used as a wick that was not singed. Rabbi Eliezer says it is susceptible to become impure, and you cannot use it for Shabbos candles. Rabbi Akiva says the opposite. The Gemara says the argument by impurity is based on whether you hold folding the garment makes it lose the status of a garment or not. Also, this case is discussing the minimum possible sized cloth, 3 by 3 finger breadths, and the candles are also being lit on a holiday that fell out on Shabbos. So, Rabbi Eliezer takes issue with this case, as when lighting the wick, it shrinks beneath the minimum cloth size, so you're now lighting a fragment of a utensil, which is not allowed on a holiday. Well, Rabbi Akiva says that the cloth never was considered to be a utensil in the first place, so it's allowed. It also lists some sources. It's discussed a bit longer, citing some additional similar cases with date pits. It's a complicated argument, but Rabbi Akiva eventually conceded the point to a Rabbi Yehoshua in regards to a cloth being hung on a peg, which is a related argument. New Mishnah. It is not allowed to hollow out an eggshell, then poke a hole in the bottom, fill it with oil, and put it above a lamp, so that way oil slowly drips out over a period of time. This is also not allowed using an earthenware holder. However, if it's attached to the lamp initially before Shabbos, then it's fine, as then it's a single vessel. Similarly, you can't have one end of a long wick in a bowl of oil to draw oil towards a lamp, but Rabbi Yehuda allows this. We had to mention an earthenware container along with an eggshell, because earthenware is pretty gross, so you might have thought otherwise that it's an exception. We had to bring the last point with the bowls, as there's an actual gap between the bowls, and it's clearly not one vessel. So you might have thought that we're strict there. Also, for the oil container and the lamp to be validly attached, it has to be properly secured by a skilled worker. There's a quick story about such a lamp, and also some stringencies mentioned in regards to dragging benches, as they could create a furrow, which is not allowed. Perhaps even indoors, although there's debate if this applies by only large, heavy benches that'll definitely create a furrow, or by anything. We conclude it's fine by smaller objects. New Mishnah. It's allowed to extinguish a lamp on Shabbos if you're worried about bandits or idolaters because you're depressed and this is going to make you feel better if you're in the dark, or so that way a sick person can fall asleep. You may not do so to save the lamp wick or oil. Rabbi Yossi, however, allows it, except for extinguishing a wick, as that turns it into charcoal, which is forbidden. The sick person here is where it's deathly ill. Others disagree, and their opinions are reflected elsewhere. On this topic, it goes off topic for a few pages to discuss King David and Solomon. King David said that the dead cannot extol God, and King Solomon said, I praise the dead who have already died, and then later, now contradicting himself, a live dog is better than a dead lion. So the explanation is that when King David said his verse, he was referring to the fact that you can only do good deeds and learn Torah when you're alive, while King Solomon's first verse referenced the fact that Moshe had to invoke the names of the forefathers who had passed by the sin of the golden calf. Or it's because Moshe made many ordinances, and yet they're all still followed even after his passing. Or it's because King David begged forgiveness for his incident with Bathsheba, and God said he'd show forgiveness during the lifetime of King Solomon. The way that went was when King Solomon built the temple, the gates of the Holy of Holies remained shut, and he couldn't bring in the Ark of the Covenant. So he said many praises and verses, and said they should open so the King of Glory may enter. So the gates got mad when they heard this and tried to swallow him, until he clarified that the King of Glory was God. However, the gates only opened when King Solomon invoked the name of his father, King David, and everyone realized then that King David had been forgiven. There are further expansions on similar verses related to this incident. The next point, a live dog is better than a dead lion, references that King David begged to know when he would die. God said on a Shabbos, So he asked him to push it off to Sunday, but God said no, as Solomon's king time should not encroach on David's. So then he asked if it should be earlier, but God also said no, because he preferred a single day of David's Torah learning to 1,000 offerings from Solomon. So every Shabbos, King David would learn Torah all day, and the angel of death couldn't do anything to him. So when the day came, the angel of death shook some trees, so King David went upstairs to see what happened, and a stair broke, so he stopped learning Torah for one moment, and he died. Now, young Solomon saw his father had passed, but there are halachic issues with moving the body on Shabbos, and he didn't want the dogs to eat at his father's corpse, so he was told to either feed the dogs some other meat, or to put like a loaf of bread or something on the body, and that'll allow you to move it somewhere else. So that's that. There are some other points. The book of Ecclesiastes, Koheles, was almost not canonized, but they decided to do it as it has verses of Torah at the beginning and end. They teach that the entire world was created for somebody that fears God and keeps his commandments, and he's of equal importance to the entire world. There are some other odd contradictions that are resolved here. Things like it explains that better God's anger towards the righteous now than the laughter the wicked get in this world. However, the laughter that God has with the righteous is worthwhile. There's also the joy of a mitzvah and joy of other things, teaching that the divine presence rests on a person who does good deeds with joy. There are other points about joy and fear, such as that it should be with the teacher and the student should be with awe and respect. Or the teacher should be joyous at the beginning of his class, as the sage Rabbah would famously begin his classes with a humorous comment, and from there would teach a very serious class. A similar issue existed with the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, that it was almost not canonized due to the apparent contradictions. For instance, it says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly," and then right after it says, "Answer a fool according to his folly." So it's answer that the first verse is about in general, and the second verse is about Torah. There are some stories of people speaking to fools, such as a sage, who some guy came over to him and told him that the sage's wife was actually his wife, and the sage's children were actually his children, so the sage offered him some wine, so the guy drank it, and then he exploded. The same thing happened to a different sage. This sage was also protected from having illegitimate children because he said the prayer She Tatzileni, which we say every day during morning blessings. Examples of speaking to fools in Torah matters is there's a story that a sage was expounding some verses about when Mashiach comes, that a woman will give birth every day, and some student said from the verse, "But there's nothing new under the sun," so the teacher showed him a hen which lays eggs every day. The sage also taught that fruits will bear fruit from trees every day, again based on a verse, so the student started causing issues and asked the same question, so the sage showed him a caper bush. Then the sage also taught that the earth by Mashiach will bring out ready-made bread and clothes. The student asked the same question, there's nothing new under the sun, so the sage showed him mushrooms and truffles, and then bast of a young palm. Also, we should always try to be humble like Hillel and not stern like Shammai. There's a story that these two guys made a bet that they could provoke the sage Hillel. So one of them went to his house where Hillel was preparing for Shabbos, so the guy started harassing him and asked, "Why are Babylonians' heads so round?" So Hillel told him that that was truly a profound question, and it was because that Babylonians don't have skillful midwives. So the guy waited a bit, started calling out for Hillel again, and then asked why the Talmudians' eyes are so round. So Hillel again complimented the question and said it's because they live in a sandy area. The same thing repeated itself, this time with the question as to why Africans' feet are so wide. So Hillel said it was because they live in a swampy region. So the guy said, "I have many more such questions." So Hillel sat down and said, "Great, ask away." So the guy said, I hope there are no others like you." So Hillel asked, "Why would you say that?" And the guy said, "Because I just lost a massive bet because I couldn't get you mad." Another story about how nice Hillel was, a non-Jewish individual once went over to Shammai and asked how many Torahs the Jewish people have. So he said 2, of course, the written and the oral Torah. So the guy said he'll only believe in the written Torah, so Shammai berated him and sent him away. So then the guy went to Hillel, who was a lot more patient, and eventually the man converted by him explaining the importance of the oral Torah. Then there's another very famous story where a guy walked over to Shammai and said he'd convert to Judaism on condition that he'd be taught the entire Torah while he stood on one foot. So Shammai whacked him with a ruler. So the guy went to Hillel and asked to be taught the entire Torah while standing on one foot. So Hillel told him, don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done to you. And the rest of it is all commentary. And now you should go and learn it. There's another story where a guy was walking past a school and overheard children being taught about the garments of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, so he thought that was pretty cool and wanted to convert to Judaism so he could become a Kohen Gadol. So he went to Shammai, who sent him away, and then he went to Hillel, who taught him, and he became Jewish. Later, it says that these three converts met up and said that the sternness of Shammai tried to push them away from God, but the humility and patience of Hillel brought them to him. Another teaching: when you pass away and go for judgment, you're asked many questions, but the most significant of them all is if you had fear of God, which is explained using an analogy of wheat and a preservative. In fact, having Torah knowledge but no fear of heaven is comparable to having the keys to the inner chamber of a house, but you can't get inside because the outer chamber is locked. That's the reason why God created the world. This is brought from a few sources. It also says, do not be exceedingly wicked. This means that if you do something wrong, don't do more wrong. Another teaching, the verse says, for there are no ties that bind them upon their death, and their strength is robust. This is a reference to the wicked, who know they will die, and yet still live hedonistic, robust lives. Okay, back to the original point on extinguishing candles. The last opinion, Rabbi Yossi, said you could extinguish everything but the wick, as he holds that dismantling in order to build something else is not considered dismantling. This is unlike the tabernacle, which was dismantled and then rebuilt in a different place, but it wasn't considered to be a different place, as each time it was decreed by God. Alternatively, we're dealing with a case of a singed wick, as then by extinguishing, he's repairing a utensil, and there are proofs brought for this. New Mishnah. There are 3 things that cause women to pass away during childbirth: not being careful by the laws of Nida, purity, separating challah, and Shabbos candles. The Gemara explains that Nida, impurity, is that as she rebelled against God through her womb, she is punished through her womb. There are sources brought for all of these. Childbirth is the time, by the way, as childbirth is a dangerous time, and there are many similar quotes regarding this. Men, however, have their dangerous time when they're judged as they do something dangerous, like crossing a bridge. Some sages would refuse to enter a boat with an idol worshipper in case they got wrapped up in that guy's punishment. Others would specifically go in their boats, as Satan does not have the power over 2 nations at one time, while some sages would just check their boats for leaks before crossing. Similarly, never do something dangerous that'll require a miracle to save you, because it might not happen, and even if it does, it's deducted from your merits. That is sourced from a verse. Some sages, if it was very windy, wouldn't go out by palm trees. Also, always pray that you don't become ill so that you don't need your merits to get better. Again, a source, and it says benefit is imparted through the meritorious and harm through the guilty. If you are about to pass, you should confess your sins. Also, if you're in a remotely dangerous situation, like going out to the market a little bit sick or very sick, you should look at it as a very extreme situation, and only repentance and good deeds will help you out. Still, though, if you have 999 accusers, or some say accusations, and 1 merit to counterbalance, you will be saved. Some say women pass early from these things, and some say it's because they launder their children's clothes on Shabbos, or because they refer to the Ark of the Covenant in a disrespectful, mundane manner, and there are similar points repeated. Another teaching, the laws of consecration of animals and tithes are fundamentals of Torah, and they were still handed to common people. Some say that the sin of unfulfilled vows causes your wife or children to pass away young. Some say children passing is from their parents neglecting to study Torah, again sourced from verses. Some even say it's from not having mezuzah up. Even further, some say it's because of not wearing tzitzis, and it's an argument of sources. However, some teach that if you're careful with tzitzis, you'll merit to have 2,800 servants for you. There are a number of other things listed with severe punishments, like hatred towards others, causing early deaths in your household, not dealing with tithes of many sorts, causing famine, robbery, causing locusts, corruption of justice, and not learning Torah, causing invasion and plundering. It lists a bunch of others. False oaths, desecrating Shabbos, and others cause wild animals to attack. Murder causes the temple to be destroyed. Forbidden relations, idolatry, and others cause exile of the Jewish people and others to settle in their lands. for bad language, it causes many other calamities, and also causes Gehenna for you, even if you hear it and say nothing. If you make time in your schedule to do wrongdoings, your body will develop welts and wounds, particularly with a disease referred to as hydrokan, which, if caused by sinning, will make your skin thicken. If from hunger, like by certain sages, it causes swelling beneath your skin, and from sorcery, it causes your skin to thin. Similar to this, it's said that an indicator of transgression is the disease hydrokan, an indicator of senseless hatred towards others is jaundice, arrogance causes lack of Torah knowledge, and of slander, diphtheria. There are more points on slander causing disease, and according to others, many sins of the mouth, like eating certain forbidden foods, can result in this disease, or perhaps by young children for other reasons, but we say it comes from slander. During this conversation, the sage Rabbi Yehuda is described as being the first of the speakers in every place. This is because of a famous story wherein Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and a few other sages were sitting together, and Rabbi Yehuda was admiring the Roman works of the city, of their markets, bridges, and bathhouses. One sage was silent, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai responded that everything was made for selfish reasons, the markets for harlots, the bridges for tolls, and the bathhouses to beautify themselves. A fourth sage told this story to others, and it spread around until the Roman government heard it. Rabbi Yehuda, who complimented the Romans, was elevated to the point where he had that title. The sage who was silent was then exiled, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was sentenced to death. So Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar, hid for a while, Rabbi Shimon's wife smuggling them food, but eventually it grew too dangerous, so they went out and hid in a cave. Miraculously, a carob tree and a spring of water grew there for their food, and they would sit in sand up to their necks all week long, only getting dressed for prayers, so their clothes wouldn't get worn out, as they stayed there for 12 years. Eventually, Eliyahu the prophet showed up and announced that Caesar had died, and their death sentence had been annulled. So they were walking back, and they saw somebody working in a field instead of studying Torah and forsaking something infinite for this world. So from then on, wherever they looked, got incinerated. So God ordered them back to the cave for another 12 months. Then, they said, after those 12 months, it's known that Gehenna is a maximum of 1 year for everybody, so it's probably fine if we go out now. And a voice from heaven said that they could leave. So they went out again, and this time his son, Rabbi Elazar's gaze would incinerate everything, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's gaze would fix everything that he looked at, saying that we're good enough, the whole world doesn't need to be at our high spiritual level. Then they saw an old man carrying bundles of myrtle home in honor of Shabbos, and when asked, he said he had 2 bundles for both parts of the verse, Shamor, remember, and Zachar, observe, so the 2 sages were then appeased. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went to his son-in-law, who saw how ruined Rabbi Shimon's skin had become from years spent sitting in sand, so he began to cry, tears which fell onto his skin, hurting him. His son-in-law said he was sad to see Rabbi Shimon like this, but Rabbi Shimon said, on the contrary, as now he had become dramatically more knowledgeable on the Torah and spiritual matters. Anyways, Rabbi Shimon wanted to do something nice for his community as thanks for his miracle, similar to how Yaakov, after being saved from Esav, either established a new coin, new marketplaces, or bathhouses. So, there was a region that had a questionable status of impurity, so he went around and defined which regions were and weren't impure. Some other guy started criticizing him, so he looked at him and the guy died. Then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went to the market, saw the original guy that had told people about what he had said to the Romans, so he asked, is this one still in this world? And looked at him, and the guy disintegrated. Okay, new Mishnah. There are 3 things a person should do before Shabbos starts. Ask to make sure that all the food you'll be eating has been tithed. Ask to make sure the Erev boundary is prepared, and to light the Shabbos candles. If you are not sure if it's dark yet, no tithing, immersing candles in a mikveh, or lighting Shabbos candles, but you may tithe demai, make an Erev boundary, and insulate hot food. The Gemara says the first source is about making peace in your home. Also, those 3 things you should say should be said nicely so your family listens. The points on Erev boundaries and installation are expounded a little bit. The time of question as to when it's dark or not is called Bein Hashmashais. It's when the sun sets, the east is reddening, and the bottom part of the sky is dark, but the top half is still light. Basically twilight, but this region of time has some debate. Some say it's a period of time, some say it's not a period, it's only a dividing line between day and night. There's further discussion as to what and when this time exactly is, but that's the idea. It also gives some ideas as to how to calculate this time if you hold it's an actual period, mostly walking between certain distances. Some say simply that 1 star out means it's day, 2 means it's Ben Hashmashais, that's twilight period, and 3 stars means it's night. This is assuming that they're medium-sized stars. It also gives some other methods of telling the times, and also says that they used to blow a series of shofar blasts to let people know when Shabbos was coming in. There's some other slightly pedantic points about definitions, what exactly is a trumpet or a shofar, and arava, certain animal stomachs, all of which have practical differences by their respective obligations. Also, the regions known as Bursif and Babylon at some point changed names, which is relevant to certain documents like divorce papers, which require an accurate name of their country. And with that, that brings us to the end of Chapter 2.